Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I hope yeah,
Put it full screen.
yeah. So I have no slides to show you. I'm just going to talk about my work, focusing on how I get my stories and mostly the key takeaway here probably is that it's essential for my work that we have quite a good freedom of information legislation, or the act of government openness, I think it's called in English, the Finnish law. You will see when I go through some cases that it's not only the key thing for getting document sources, but also essential for getting human sources. So that's something that I understood that Italy introduced same kind of legislation 8 years ago or something like that, but it's still not. From what I hear from my investigative colleagues in Italy, it's not implemented in way that it is in Finland. And in Finland, the legislation was introduced in 1999, and for the first years, journalists weren't able to do much with it. But after several cases where journalists took their denied requests to administrative court and won, it has become an essential tool for investigative journalism. Oh yeah, one important thing when we talk about investigative journalism in Finland is for international audiences is to note that it's quite safe in Finland. So that's usually something that I get asked a lot, and if I receive threats and I've never felt like physically threatened or in any way. The worst thing that could happen might be some lawsuits. And since I've been working for newsrooms for past several years, that's no problem either, because the newsrooms have enough money to pay for the defense if something comes up. So, my topic was investigating corruption and fraud, and I've done it quite a lot. And the key thing to understand is that it's basically usually by accident that we find something out, and this is something that you don't realize when you listen to journalists talk about their stories and how they were done. We always, for our award ceremonies, we come up with a story where this was the thing that we were interested in, and this was the strategy that we developed to investigate this thing. But that's usually the process is quite a chaos, and it's easy to after the investigation it's easy to tell a clean story how we did this perfectly. But I'd say that in nine cases out of 10 that became some sort of scoops about corruption or fraud, it was an accident. I was investigating something totally different, and then came across with some person or some document that led me to another way, and we found out about a more interesting case. And as said, mostly my work, contrary to popular belief, it's not whistleblowers or some deep throats in the government who tip off journalists. At least not in my case. It's mostly I file quite a lot of requests for public documents. Usually, there's some sort of public discussion about something, and there are questions unanswered, And I start thinking that whether there would be some official documents that could shed more light on this issue, and I file a request for them, because the Finnish Act on Government Openness means that every single document of public authorities is public unless the law stipulates otherwise. But the basic assumption is the publicness of those documents, so it's easy to get. So I can basically read authorities' mail if I have the just go through the trouble of sending one email and asking for them. And that's actually a fact. Officials' emails are also public documents that are under the scope of the law. So in many cases, I've requested emails of individual authorities. Also, there are good registers in Finland. The land register is a really good one. It goes back, I think, hundreds of years, and the ownership of land is the owner of the land is the person or entity that is written in the registry. So it's a really good and easy and sure way to figure out land ownership. And there are good online databases, not only about the ownership, but also the purchase prices of land. And one major case of corruption and fraud was Youth Foundation. I think it was 8 years ago when me and my colleague did stories about that, which led to a big criminal financial crime investigation. And I think last year there were finally court convictions about that. So it also shows that the criminal process is quite long in Finland. But it was a case about Youth Foundation. As I said, Youth Foundation was a foundation building houses for young people who needed housing from coming from the countryside to Helsinki and other major cities in 1960s. I think one political party put up this foundation that received government funding to build houses for the young people coming from the countryside to work in Helsinki. And of course, they had accumulated quite a wealth with hundreds of, or at least hundreds, I think it might have been a couple of thousand apartments in Helsinki. And there was a major scandal involving Youth Foundation already in 2010, I think, when it became known that they had used some of the money, really small amounts, thousands or tens of thousands, for political donations that were against the law. But because of that scandal, the foundation was sort of no politician wanted to be involved in the governing the foundation, so it was kind of left the wrong hands for some minor former party officials who had started embezzling the funds there. And the way we found that out, or basically it was my colleague who started the project without me. Before he just decided that he will go through the political foundations, because it had been 6 years after the scandal with all these politically connected foundations. So he will just go through their annual accounts and see if there's something shady going on, because it was kind of a forgotten topic and something that you should look and check back on whether everything is going right now, or if they've gone back to their old bad habits. And why he started with Youth Foundation was that because it was the biggest scandal involving that, he thought that everything has to be in order there, so it will be an easy place to start with. But as said, now 8 years after it certainly wasn't. But soon he found out that they were building new apartments, really a lot of them, and they were always built by the same construction company. And then he used the land register to see whether I think you can search the land register of the real estate deals also by the parties. So he was able to just get a listing from the database of all real estate deals made by Youth Foundation and all the real estate deals made by this construction company. And he soon found out from the listings that the construction company had bought real estate and in a couple of days sold that same real estate again for 10 times the price that they purchased it for. And this was a pattern. There were at least a dozen of real estates that this pattern applied to. And that's, of course, a red flag. And what we found out eventually by requesting public documents, the deal contracts itself, which are public documents in Finland as well, was that what happened was that they bought land, then they made a contract for renting that land for Youth Foundation for example, 100 years with huge rent, and then they were able to sell that for 10 times the purchasing price for an investment fund. And this is what they did, and this is how they embezzled the funds from the Youth Foundation and then used some imaginary consulting contracts to pay some of that as like paybacks, and of course to funnel that money for themselves. And so it was, and this is usually the way that we find our fraud and corruption cases, that we just go through a lot of documents and registers and just fish for something, and eventually something comes up, and it's really time consuming work. But luckily the Finnish newsrooms, it seems that they are investing more to investigate the journalism. I've been it's 20 years now when I started my journalism studies at university, and the past couple of years are the first years that I've seen some sort of growing demand in investigative journalism. There's been a lot of layoffs in the newsrooms and definitely scaling back in the investigative journalism for the past 20 years, but we are seeing a change now. But again here it would have been totally impossible to find out about this scheme if it was not for the transparency of those documents. And more also government officials are arguing that it shouldn't be out in the open. Well, the privacy GDPR and all sorts of privacy concerns are taking away this transparency, which is essential for us to do our work. And I've been trying to go around in this kind of conferences, and I've been sitting in expert groups of ministries trying to remind people that when even if journalists have access to documents with, for example, private information about individuals, that doesn't mean that we will publish them in papers. We are not able to, because there is criminal law that we will get punished if we publish sort of sensitive private information. But people keep forgetting this. They tend to argue that this has to be held secret because this does not belong to the newspapers, printed in newspapers. But that's not the way it goes. We need that information, to be able to do our research, and we will not publish sensitive private information. And if we do, we will get punished for it. And this is something I talked with my Italian colleagues as well, that this is sort of attitude that they are banging their heads against the wall with. And I do welcome questions also during my presentation. If there is something you want to ask, just raise your hands on Google Meet here or in the room. Then I want to talk about the human sources, which were, of course, really important in the previous case as well. I don't want to go into the details, but there was also the heads of the Youth Foundation. They had bought this spa resort that was in need of like millions of investments in repairing the place, and that was done by the same construction company. So it was this kind of scheme where they used the public funds of the foundation to pay for their private business being repaired, and for that we needed a lot of human sources, which is of course easier when you have the public documents. You know where the pieces of land are that you are interested in, and you can from the same registers figure out who owns the land next to that and call them on a phone and ask questions and gather more information on human sources that know something about it. But human sources were really important in another story. Sami Yläoutinen, the general auditor of Finland, was talking here in the morning. His predecessor, Tytti Yliviikari, was the first official fired by the parliament, the first one in Finnish history that the parliament fired. When the Finnish parliament fired a person that only the parliament has the power to appoint or dismiss, and it was the Auditor General Yliviikari. Mostly, I'd say, because of my stories, and well, my stories which also started some criminal investigations. But that's an interesting case to talk about when talking about investigating corruption in journalism, because this usually happens that criminal investigation follows from the press reports, but the scope of the criminal investigation is something totally different than the original reporting. And in Tytti Yliviikari's case, the big picture was that she had been changing the role of the National Auditing Office to some sort of consultant, not a supervisor. And the story started. The first thing I remember about the origins of the story was that I started thinking to myself that what is the National Auditing Office doing these days? Because I remember that 15 years ago, there were multiple times per year, there were like big headlines about the results of their investigations. But I hadn't heard anything about National Auditing Office of Finland for several years, and I started looking into their purchases. You got from Venla the tutki hankintoja, meaning investigate procurements or something like that. Database where you have every single purchase made by basically every single authority, public authority or the governmental authority in Finland, which is a really good source of information when you want to take a look at what's happening somewhere, following the money, what are they spending on. And there I noticed these consultancies, that they were buying something from various consultancies that at least in my mind, were more or less well, I don't want to say bullshit, but not like something that you would expect the National Auditing Office buying. And I filed a Freedom of Information request to get those invoices and also whatever documents came out of those contracts. That what were the consultancies hired for? I want the reports or whatever they did. And there I could see that, okay, they are devising a new strategy that was full of everything but their main task, which is not only in the law, but it's in the constitution of Finland, that what they are supposed to do, which is auditing the public finances. And then I started asking around, and I kept hearing that, that that you can't do anything too critical anymore, that the leadership doesn't want it. They don't want to create a fuss. They want a positive sort of spirit, forward-looking positive spirit in the reports and stuff like that. And then I realized that there had been press reports about this with anonymous sources and really like not so concrete allegations, but sort of very vague criticism made by some anonymous sources, which even I had missed, because that doesn't really grab your attention, that someone at some office is not happy with the way that they are conducting their businesses. But I was pretty sure that, okay, there is some basis in this criticism, but we just need to do it properly. Find out concrete examples, and most important would be to get sources on the record, so that they are more trustworthy than some anonymous. Because you can go to any office with more than 3 people and find someone who is not happy, who has something to complain about, at least if he or she can do that anonymously. And this was something that I couldn't do with Freedom of Information request. That there would be no documents about this, or at least I would have to know specifically what kind of documents and I am looking. There could be drafts of reports that were censored for the final publication or something like that, but it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack without knowing what to do. And then I realized remembered that the best source are always retired officials, because they're not afraid of talking. Their wives or husbands are already bored of listening to them talk about how everything's been done in a bad way now, and how everything was done perfectly when I was around, and they usually spent their careers not answering journalist phone calls, because this is classified, I can't tell you, and then all of a sudden they find themselves in a place where no journalists are calling, and they would want to talk about things. So what I did was that I went through the recent reports published by National Auditing Office, looked at the names of the writers, then went through their employee list to find out people who recently worked there but don't work there anymore, and started calling them and asking about, I've heard this, do you know anything more about this? And we were talking on background, and I called for several days and weeks even, and then when I started getting mentions of specific reports that were censored, or specific things, concrete allegations, I was also able to use them, the retired officials, as ask them to be my messengers. That because of course in that kind of environment everyone's were so afraid of talking to journalists. There had been group leaders taken, like demoted, and all sorts of punishments given out to anyone who was critical of the new leadership. So it was really hard to convince people to talk. But I didn't have to do that at the first stage. I could use the retired people as my messengers. Of course, I couldn't use that information in my reporting when I don't even know who's talking. But anyway, I could get more information, sort of intelligence information, to focus my research. And finally, I could get introductions, and I could get the form of like a trust relationship with the people I was talking with, who again had the trust of the people still working there. So I was able to get introductions, get people to talk to me on background, and finally convince some of them to go on the record. When I was able to promise them that they won't be left like out in the open in a sort of he said, she said setting, where they would be alone with their allegations against the leadership of the office, saying that this is bullshit. And this is what is really important in investigative journalism in Finland, at least, that many people have the fear of that if they come out in the open, if they come on the record, say something, the journalist won't do their part of the job. The journalist won't put enough effort to find out who is telling the truth and who is lying, and they will be presented as sort of the reader can decide who's talking, who's telling the truth and who's not. And of course, the readers tend to trust the higher ups more, and they have more resources of just to serve the media. They have more PR resources at their disposal. But it was several months, or I don't know, 2 months, I think, when I finally got enough documents and enough, actually two people to go on the record and more than 20 people off the record. So I was able to report the same things that my colleague had reported 5 years earlier, but this time it really changed something, and it was a huge scandal. But there were also a couple of, and this is what I think the general audience doesn't even remember this big picture anymore, because there was also one or two like details in the whole reporting that led to criminal processes. The other one was that the Auditor General had done an unlawful agreement of getting rid of an employee who there were some challenges in his like work, but not enough to fire him. So they did this agreement that he will get the full salary for 2 years, and he doesn't have to, or actually he's not allowed to work for that 2 years. And this was by Finnish law illegal to do this kind of agreement with public funds. And that became a criminal investigation, and eventually she was also convicted for that. And the other one was that she traveled a lot. In the big picture, what had happened was that Tytti Yliviikari had like half the resources used for example, the performance audits. They were doing or spending working hours on performance audits only 50% of what it used to be before her term. But what they were doing now, their traveling cost had like gone through the roof. She had, for example, made a sort of partnership agreement with the auditing office of Bhutan. And to my knowledge, mainly to be able to travel to Bhutan in business class with a couple of her like trusted friends, basically, that she had appointed there and stuff like this. So there was a lot of travel costs, and for a lot of traveling you get a lot of loyalty card bonuses from the airline company. And the National Auditing Office had a few years before, they had made a big point out of it, that they had compliance audit in many authorities in Finland to check how the travel regulations are being met in the highest leadership of those authorities. And one notion there was that the loyalty points from business trips paid by the taxpayers has to be used in business trips to save taxpayers money. You can't take that to yourself. And there have been one criminal process about embezzlement, I think, when one high police officer had used her or his, I don't remember the gender anymore, the loyalty points on private vacations. And I heard during my reporting or research that this might be the case with Yliviikari as well, because there was no case where the loyalty points had paid for any of the business trips. And I filed freedom of information requests about that, and I didn't receive anything with those requests, and I was quite certain that this is the case that there's a reason why she wants to hide them. And I wrote a story about how the National Auditing Office is not able to like supervise how their own flight loyalty points are being used. And I don't know if it was the criminal police itself or if someone in the audience filed a criminal report, but after that story ran, criminal investigation started about this kind of minor detail as well. But when there's a criminal process and a sort of investigative journalism process alongside, what happens, at least in the Finnish media, is that all the newsrooms start focusing on the criminal process. And suddenly the whole case about Yliviikari in people's mind and in the newsrooms became about flight points and this whatever agreement of ending the contract of the one official, which were both really minor things, but of course they were criminal proceedings. Well, yeah, finally the parliament dismissed her, and now Sami Yläoutinen is, at least to my knowledge, doing a great job. They're building, repairing what his predecessor destroyed. But this is something the criminal processes, starting from the reporting of the investigative journalist, they often lead to the conclusion, because the legislation in Finland, it's really hard to get anyone convicted of corruption per se. There are usually this kind of really small details, which gives the impression to the general audience that the Finnish corruption is something like this. Someone took 8,000 euros in flight loyalty points and used them themselves or something like that. And I don't know really what to do about it. And there's so many cases where there's an obvious ethical wrongdoing reported by the media, and then there is some sort of legal issue, and maybe police, maybe Chancellor of Justice, someone investigates the minor legal issue there and finds out that okay, this was okay, and then all the media reports that he or she got a clean record from the Chancellor of Justice or from the police or from the whatever body, supervising body it might be. So, and then again, the general audience and even journalists tend to think that okay, so the original reporting was wrong. There was nothing wrong here, even though what actually happened was that there is and ethical wrongdoing. There might be a reason to change the law, but still, this is a really hard discussion in Finnish society. I think that most of my reporting about I don't want to say obvious ethical wrongdoings, but ethical questions that should be discussed as a society, that whether we want this kind of thing to happen or not. Should this be legal or not? And even though if it's legal, do we want our politicians acting this way, for example? But it's really hard. The first question I got usually asked is, where is the crime? What's illegal here? Whether I'm writing about tax evasion or something other. But if it's legal, it's okay. So on the other hand, we talk about a lot, like Venla said, that it's a ultima ratio, the last thing. Criminalizing something is the sort of last resort. We don't want to criminalize everything. It's not. We don't want that the sort of borders of acceptable behavior are written in the law. It should be much broader the limits of the law than what we want as a society. But it's a hard discussion in Finland. At least that's my experience, that we are unable to have a sort of ethical conversation. It always goes sort of sideways, and we start talking about whether it is legal or illegal. And that's probably one reason why we don't tend to recognize corruption in Finland. What is corruption by our law, especially our case law, is not something that we tend to do. Well, I said 40 minutes ago, I guess the conviction came from that.
Yeah, he is convicted.
Okay, so he was convicted. Okay, so government official with power to influence one company's businesses demanded to get a very valuable violin from the CEO and owner of that company, and got it. And he was now convicted of accepting a bribe, I assume. Aggravated, acceptance of a bribe. So far, so good. But this doesn't happen a lot, because I think when I talk about the trust, how the trust is a good thing that it keeps the corruption, well, not away, but in control. I kind of feel that that's also the trust is what enables the Finnish corruption to flourish, because we don't need money as sort of means of exchange. We are so few. People trust each other. So we don't need money, that if you do that decision, here's a brown envelope for you, and it would be simultaneously handed. Here's the money. Here's for example, the land zoning decision that someone needs, or whatever. It's more like, it doesn't have to be even I give you this, you give me that. It could. I think most usually the Finnish sort of structural corruption that I try to every now and then report something about it is you give me something, I give him something, and he gives you something, sort of schemes, and probably not even ever said aloud. It's just sort of culture where we need to, we all know that we are good people, we are the best ones handling this, whatever we are handling, and we will just look out for each other. I think there are many occasions that the people involved in the corruption don't even realize it's corruption. We even had a former prime minister say that it's a sort of advantage for Finland, these sort of corruptive networks. Or he didn't use that word. We use hyvä veli network. It's a good brother network, that they are an advantage to the Finnish society. People know each other, the elites know each other, and they trust each other, and stuff like that. So but it's really hard to get a conviction exchanging sort of favors for favors. There has to be something valuable involved, like the violin here now, that then everyone sees, even the Finnish judges see that, okay, this is bribery, this is corruption. But because we, or the courts don't recognize the Finnish corruption, we don't get convictions, we don't get cases, we don't get statistics showing that we have corruption. And then we have a general public thinking that, well, I don't know. Then again, I think much of the general public, ordinary Finns think that there is a lot of corruption, that they see through it. But still, it's a hard. We are still discussing whether or not there is corruption in Finland. so that maybe tells you something. But now I'm open for questions if there is any.
Okay, thank you very much, Jarno. And are there questions from the audience?
Thank you very much. I have a question about, say, journalism itself, meaning that for you to be able to publish a story, your newspaper should allow you to. And my question is, how much do you think is important for the freedom of journalism to have, say, well, I don't know if in Finland the newspapers are public or private companies. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But how much do you think it's important that the ownership of the newspapers for investigative journalism to advance and to be effective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Newspapers in Finland are owned by private companies, and it's funny that we talk about how for example, the media in Hungary is owned, or the ownership structure. We have a media owned by oligarchs. There's basically, I once calculated, probably 3 men can decide pretty much what happens in the Finnish press, because it's so centered. But then again, I hope it's probably again a cultural thing that the freedom of speech is really appreciated. There's been no problems. The only time I ran into problems was at the government or public state-owned public broadcasting company in a situation where their budget was discussed in the parliament, and it was the Youth Foundation case actually that I was talking about. But we wrote a book about it, and we got fired, but so did the editor-in-chief and the CEO as well. So it's a big scandal in Finland every time someone tries to affect the journalism in that way, straight off dismissing a story that we are not publishing this. But of course, there are more subtle influence. Could be that the owners might like some sort of stories, and they tell the editors-in-chief that it was a great story, and when we do another kind of story, they probably don't so much, give straight feedback, but probably they editors-in-chief know that, okay, this wasn't probably something that they wanted. But we have a really strong professional sort of ethics. So I think that's the good medicine against the really centered ownership, is that all the journalists are looking for trouble with the owners. So nothing would please me more than get the owner or some sort of hint that they are censoring some story, and it would be a huge news. It would be the biggest news story probably. So and that's a cultural thing. The Finnish audience don't accept anything like that at all, and neither do the Finnish editors-in-chief or the Finnish staff reporters either. So I am really, theoretically worried about the really narrow ownership structure of Finnish media, but in practice, in my I'd say 10 years in professional investigative journalism, it hasn't been a problem.
Actually, it's a treasure that you have, and you should keep it, because when the journalist cannot speak out loud anymore, then the troubles begin.
Yeah, that's exactly. And it's not only for journalism, but for the societies as whole. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I have one short. I will just have one short question. From your point of view, how big role has investigative journalism in general in fighting corruption in Finland, if you compare to other control mechanisms?
Well,
I know you're not a control mechanism as such, but as a tool.
Yeah. Well, me and the few colleagues that have the luxury of doing only investigative stories, I think we are sort of control mechanism, because if you look at the criminal cases, I'm pretty confident in saying that more than half of them comes from our reporting, originate from our reporting, not from those actual control mechanisms. And I don't know why that is, but I know, for example, that I have it's not a big phenomenon, but it's a sort of a phenomenon. It's not 1, 2, or 3 times, but more than that I've had, for example, police officers or tax investigators, what are they called, phone me on like confidential basis that I have this case on my table, or you need to write about this, or the bosses won't let me to investigate this. So this is it's at least a really good sort of. So there is also these deep throats, these tip-offs that we get every now and then. But investigative journalism is really important. Many of the cases originate from our reporting, and in part it is because it creates pressure, of course, that when we write about something, it's more likely to get investigated. The police don't have too much resources. They really don't want to investigate, or at least the bosses don't want to investigate too much. But when we write about something, they have to. So that's, of course, one reason. And also, one thing I missed was that it's really important. We do a lot of these sort of stories almost despised by journalists as well. At least some of us, sort of which member of parliament used the taxi the most, or what government authority spent most money on the pre-Christmas party, or stuff like that. Really not so important stuff. But I think that's a really good public service, that kind of stuff, all that kind of stuff. We get criticized a lot for a reason, for doing that kind of journalism, writing about thousands of euros when there are billions of euros in recovery and resilience facility, for example, that we should be monitoring. But then again, it's the preventive function of doing that kind of journalism. I always like to say that it's a really good thing in a society, and it's not what we report that happened. It's about what doesn't happen, because people are afraid that we would report about it. That has the big financial effect, I think. And I like to say that it's a really good thing that whether it's a businessman or a politician or whatever civil servant, that it's not enough for them to think whether this is legal or not legal. They also have to think, what will this look in a tabloid, on the cover of a tabloid newspaper, and that's something that also keeps the keeps them conducting better than they would maybe otherwise. But now I'm sorry to say that I need to run because I'm going to my own corruptive event. Pension fund has invited us to dinner and sauna.
Wow, that's very corruptive. Thank you very much.